Sergeant Maria Rodriguez had always been the smallest person in her unit, but nobody questioned her strength. At 5 feet 2 inches tall, she could carry a wounded soldier twice her size across rough terrain. She could shoot with deadly accuracy even when her hands shook from exhaustion. But everything changed on that October morning in Afghanistan, when an IED explosion turned her world upside down. The blast happened so fast that Maria barely remembered the details. One moment she was walking point for her squad through a narrow mountain pass, and the next moment she was lying in a hospital bed in Germany with doctors explaining that she would never walk normally again. Shrapnel had torn through her left leg, damaging nerves and muscles that would never fully heal. Her right arm had been broken in 3 places, and though it would mend, it would always be weaker than before. When Maria finally returned to Camp Pendleton 6 months later, she expected her fellow Marines to welcome her back with the same respect they had always shown. Instead, she found whispers following her wherever she walked with her noticeable limp. The physical therapy sessions that were supposed to help her regain strength became a source of cruel entertainment for some of the younger Marines. "Look at Rodriguez trying to do push-ups," Lance Corporal Jenkins would snicker to his friends during morning PT. "My grandmother moves faster than that." The group would laugh as Maria struggled to complete exercises that had once been effortless for her. Her injured arm trembled under her own weight, and her damaged leg made it impossible to maintain proper form. Staff Sergeant Williams, who had never liked the idea of women in combat roles, made things even worse. "Maybe it's time to consider a desk job, Rodriguez," he would say loudly enough for everyone to hear. "The Marine Corps needs people who can actually fight, not charity cases." His words cut deeper than any physical wound, because Maria knew that many people agreed with him. The worst part was not the cruel comments or the snickering, but the way her own squad members began to treat her differently. These were men she had served alongside for 2 years, men whose lives she had risked her own to save. Now they acted like she was made of glass, speaking to her in soft voices and taking over tasks she was perfectly capable of doing herself. Corporal Thompson, who used to joke around with her like she was one of the guys, now avoided eye contact and spoke to her only when necessary. "It's not personal, Rodriguez," he had explained when she confronted him. "It's just hard to see you like this. You used to be so strong." His words, though meant kindly, felt like a knife twisting in her chest. Maria spent her nights lying in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and wondering if everyone was right. Maybe she was just fooling herself by trying to stay in the Corps. Maybe her fighting days really were over. The physical pain from her injuries was nothing compared to the emotional pain of feeling like she no longer belonged in the place she had called home for the past 4 years. During the day, she pushed herself through every training exercise, every drill, every challenge that was thrown at her. She refused to ask for special treatment or accommodations, even when her legs screamed in pain and her arm felt like it was on fire. She knew that showing any weakness would only give her critics more ammunition. The physical therapy sessions became a kind of torture, not because of the exercises themselves, but because of the audience that gathered to watch. Young Marines would lean against the walls of the gym, pretending to wait for their turn while actually watching Maria struggle with weights that she used to lift easily. Their quiet laughter and whispered comments made every repetition feel like a public humiliation. "She's trying so hard," she heard one of them say. "It's almost sad to watch." Another voice replied, "I heard she used to be really tough. Hard to believe now." Maria pretended not to hear, but each word felt like a physical blow. Her platoon leader, Lieutenant Morrison, tried to be supportive, but even his encouragement felt hollow. "Take your time, Rodriguez," he would say during training exercises. "Nobody expects you to keep up with the others." The implication was clear. She was no longer considered an equal member of the team. The isolation became overwhelming. Meals in the mess hall were eaten alone because her former friends didn't know how to act around her anymore. Weekend liberty was spent in her barracks room because she couldn't bear to go out and face more pitying looks or cruel comments. Maria began to wonder if she was fighting a battle she could never win. Late one evening, as she was finishing a solo workout in the gym, Master Sergeant Davis approached her. He was an older Marine with 30 years of service, someone who commanded respect from everyone on base. "Rodriguez," he said quietly, "I've been watching you these past few weeks." Maria's heart sank, expecting another lecture about accepting her limitations. Instead, Davis surprised her. "You remind me of myself 20 years ago when I came back from Desert Storm with a back injury. Everyone thought I was finished too." He paused, studying her face. "The difference is, you're not giving up. That takes more courage than anything you did in Afghanistan." His words offered a small comfort, but Maria still felt like she was drowning in a sea of doubt and criticism. She had always defined herself as a Marine, and now she didn't know who she was supposed to be. The woman who had once led her squad through enemy fire was gone, replaced by someone who struggled to complete basic training exercises. As Maria continued her painful journey of recovery, she had no idea that her story was about to take a dramatic turn. General Patricia Hayes, a decorated Marine Corps leader who had broken barriers herself as one of the first women to serve in certain combat roles, was coming to Camp Pendleton for an inspection visit. The general had a reputation for seeing things that others missed, and her arrival would change everything for Maria Rodriguez. General Patricia Hayes stepped out of her staff car at Camp Pendleton with the bearing of someone who had spent 35 years earning respect in a male-dominated military. At 58 years old, she had commanded troops in Iraq, led peacekeeping missions in Somalia, and broken through barriers that many thought were impossible for women to cross. Her reputation preceded her wherever she went. The base buzzed with nervous energy as word spread about the general's surprise inspection. Officers scrambled to ensure everything was perfect, while enlisted Marines practiced their drills with extra intensity. Everyone knew that General Hayes had a sharp eye for detail and an even sharper tongue for those who didn't meet her standards. Maria Rodriguez watched the preparation chaos from the physical therapy room, where she was working on strengthening exercises for her injured arm. She felt a mixture of curiosity and dread about the general's visit. Part of her hoped that maybe, just maybe, a senior female officer would understand her struggles. But another part of her feared that the general would see her as an embarrassment to women in the military. "Did you hear General Hayes is coming to observe morning PT tomorrow?" asked Petty Officer Chen, the physical therapist who had been working with Maria for the past month. "Word is, she specifically requested to see all the Marines in action, not just the pretty showcase units." Maria's stomach tightened. Morning PT was always her most difficult time. Her injured leg was stiff from sleeping, and her arm needed time to warm up before it could handle any real work. The thought of performing in front of the legendary general while her fellow Marines snickered in the background made her feel sick. That evening, Staff Sergeant Williams gathered Maria's unit for a briefing about the general's visit. "Listen up, Marines," he barked. "Tomorrow we need to show General Hayes what real Marine Corps excellence looks like. I want sharp movements, perfect form, and no weak links." His eyes lingered on Maria when he said the last part, making his meaning crystal clear. Lance Corporal Jenkins raised his hand with a smirk. "Sergeant, what if some people can't keep up with the real Marines?" The question drew snickers from several others in the group. Williams didn't reprimand them, which was answer enough. "Everyone participates," Williams said finally, "but I expect all Marines to perform at Marine Corps standards." The implication hung heavy in the air. Maria felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and anger, but she kept her mouth shut. After the briefing, Maria stayed behind to speak with Williams privately. "Staff Sergeant, I've been doing well in my individual training, I think I can handle tomorrow's PT session without any problems. Williams looked at her with barely concealed irritation. Rodriguez, this isn't about what you think you can handle. This is about the reputation of this unit. General Hayes is evaluating our readiness and effectiveness. We can't afford to look weak. I'm not weak, Maria replied firmly. I'm injured, but I'm not weak. There's a difference. Is there? Williams shot back. Because from where I stand, it looks like the same thing. You slow down the whole unit, Rodriguez. Maybe it's time to accept that your combat days are over. Maria left the meeting feeling more determined than ever to prove him wrong. She spent the rest of the evening in the gym, pushing herself through extra exercises despite the pain shooting through her leg. She practiced the movements they would do in PT, timing herself and working on her form. If she was going to be humiliated in front of the general, at least she would know she had tried her hardest. The next morning arrived with typical California sunshine, but Maria felt like storm clouds were gathering over her head. She arrived at the PT field early and began her warm-up routine, trying to loosen her stiff muscles before the others arrived. Her leg felt particularly bad today, and her arm was aching from the previous night's workout. Other Marines began filtering onto the field, and Maria noticed the way they looked at her with a mixture of pity and annoyance. She had become used to these looks over the past few weeks, but today they felt especially sharp. Everyone knew the general would be watching, and nobody wanted to be associated with the unit's weak link. General Hayes arrived exactly on time, accompanied by a small group of senior officers. Maria had seen photos of the general before, but meeting her in person was different. Hayes was not a large woman, but she carried herself with an authority that made her seem to fill more space than her physical size suggested. Her gray hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her uniform was perfectly pressed. "Good morning, Marines," General Hayes called out in a voice that carried easily across the field. "I'm here to observe your morning physical training. I want to see how you work as a team and how you support each other. Carry on with your normal routine." Staff Sergeant Williams stepped forward and began leading the unit through their warm-up exercises. Maria positioned herself toward the back of the formation, hoping to stay out of the general's direct line of sight. But as they moved through jumping jacks, mountain climbers, and stretching routines, she became increasingly aware that General Hayes was watching everything with intense focus. The real test came when Williams announced that they would be doing timed runs around the track. Maria's heart sank. Running had always been her strongest skill before the injury, but now her damaged leg made it impossible to maintain her old pace. She knew she would finish last, probably by a significant margin. 2-mile run in formation, Williams announced. Standard pace, standard expectations. He looked directly at Maria when he said it, as if daring her to ask for accommodations. As the group lined up at the starting line, Maria heard Jenkins whisper to his friend, "This is going to be painful to watch. Should we call an ambulance now?" The comment drew quiet laughter from several nearby Marines. General Hayes, who was standing close enough to hear the comment, turned and looked directly at Jenkins. Her expression was unreadable, but something in her eyes made the young Marine shift uncomfortably and look away. The run began, and within the first quarter mile, Maria found herself falling behind the main group. Her injured leg was screaming in pain, and her breathing became labored much faster than it used to. But she gritted her teeth and kept moving forward, refusing to quit despite the growing distance between her and the other runners. About halfway through the run, something unexpected happened. Master Sergeant Davis, who had been running near the middle of the pack, suddenly dropped back to run alongside Maria. "Looking good, Rodriguez," he said quietly. "Just keep that steady pace." A few minutes later, Corporal Thompson also fell back from his position near the front. Then Petty Officer Chen joined them. Soon, Maria realized that nearly half of her unit had adjusted their pace to stay with her, creating an informal support group that helped carry her through the most difficult parts of the run. General Hayes watched this development with growing interest. What had started as a standard PT observation was turning into something much more revealing about the character and leadership within this unit. She climbed into a golf cart and began following the runners, paying particular attention to the group that had formed around the struggling sergeant. As they entered the final stretch of the run, Maria was running on pure willpower. Every step sent sharp pain up her leg, and her arm was cramping from the awkward way she had to swing it to maintain balance. But she was not alone. The Marines who had chosen to stay with her were offering quiet encouragement and even helping to pace her breathing. "Almost there, Rodriguez," Master Sergeant Davis called out. "You've got this." When they finally crossed the finish line, Maria collapsed to her knees, gasping for air and fighting back tears of pain and exhaustion. She had finished the run, but she knew her time was probably the worst in the unit's history. She expected to see disappointment and embarrassment on the faces around her. Instead, she found herself surrounded by Marines who were patting her shoulders and offering water bottles. Even some of the younger Marines who had been mocking her earlier were looking at her with something that might have been respect. General Hayes had been watching this entire scene unfold, and what she saw impressed her more than any parade ground precision or record-breaking run times ever could. She had witnessed something that military leaders spend their entire careers trying to instill in their troops: the willingness to sacrifice individual glory for the good of the team. General Hayes walked slowly toward the group of Marines who had gathered around Maria Rodriguez after the run. Her expression was thoughtful, and the senior officers following behind her seemed uncertain about what she was thinking. Staff Sergeant Williams hurried over, clearly nervous about how the general might react to what she had witnessed. "General Hayes," Williams began, "I apologize for the disruption to our standard PT routine. Sergeant Rodriguez has been recovering from combat injuries, and I should have—" The general raised her hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Staff Sergeant, I want to speak with Sergeant Rodriguez privately. The rest of you carry on with your duties." Maria struggled to her feet, still breathing heavily from the run. Her leg was throbbing, and she could feel sweat and tears mixing on her face. She was certain that her military career was about to end with a conversation she would never forget. "Walk with me, Sergeant," General Hayes said quietly. They moved away from the group toward a small bench near the edge of the PT field. Maria limped alongside the general, trying to compose herself and prepare for what she was sure would be a gentle but firm suggestion that she consider medical retirement. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the other Marines continue their training. Finally, General Hayes spoke. "Tell me about Afghanistan." Maria was surprised by the question. She had expected to be asked about her limitations or her fitness for duty, not about her combat experience. "Ma'am, I was part of a convoy security detail. We were providing escort for supply trucks through the Kandahar province when our vehicle hit an IED. "What happened after the explosion?" the general asked. "Two of my Marines were injured worse than me," Maria replied. "Lance Corporal Stevens had a head injury and was unconscious. Private Martinez had severe bleeding from shrapnel wounds. I helped get them both to the evacuation helicopter before I allowed the medics to treat my own injuries." General Hayes nodded slowly. "And how long did that take?" "About 45 minutes, ma'am. The landing zone was a quarter-mile from the blast site, and we had to carry them because the terrain was too rough for vehicles." "With your own injuries?" the general pressed. "Yes, ma'am, but they were hurt worse than I was." General Hayes turned to look directly at Maria. "Sergeant Rodriguez, I've read your service record. I know about the commendation you received for your actions that day. I also know that you carried Lance Corporal Stevens, who weighs about 200 pounds, across rough terrain while you had a compound fracture in your arm and a severely damaged leg." Maria looked down at her hands. "I was just doing my job." "Ma'am." "No," the general said firmly. "You were doing much more than your job. You were demonstrating the kind of courage and selflessness that defines what it means to be a Marine. They sat in silence again as General Hayes seemed to consider her next words carefully. What I witnessed here today during that run tells me even more about your character. Do you know why those Marines slowed down to stay with you? Maria shook her head. She had been wondering the same thing. Because you've earned their respect, the general explained. Not the young ones who don't understand what real courage looks like yet, but the experienced Marines who've seen enough combat to recognize a true warrior when they see one. General Hayes stood up and began walking again, with Maria following beside her. I spent the first 15 years of my career proving that women could serve in combat roles. I faced doubts, criticism, and sometimes outright hostility from people who thought I didn't belong. Do you know what changed their minds? No, ma'am. It wasn't because I could outrun them or outshoot them, although I could do both. It was because when the shooting started, I stood my ground and took care of my Marines. That's what you did in Afghanistan, and that's what you're still doing here. They had walked back toward the area where the other Marines were continuing their training. General Hayes called Staff Sergeant Williams over to join them. Staff Sergeant, I want to discuss Sergeant Rodriguez's assignment with you. Williams straightened up nervously. Yes, ma'am. I've been meaning to recommend that she be transferred to a non-combat role where she might be more comfortable. That won't be necessary, the general said coolly. In fact, I think Sergeant Rodriguez would be an excellent candidate for our new Wounded Warrior Leadership Program. We need experienced combat veterans who understand both the challenges of recovering from injuries and the importance of never giving up. Maria felt her heart racing. This was not the conversation she had expected at all. The general continued. The program involves training other injured service members and helping them transition back to active duty or successful civilian careers. It requires someone with combat experience, leadership skills, and the personal understanding of what it means to overcome serious obstacles. Williams looked confused. Ma'am, with all due respect, Sergeant Rodriguez has been struggling with some of our basic PT requirements. I'm not sure she's ready for a leadership position. General Hayes turned to Williams with a look that could have frozen fire. Staff Sergeant, what I saw today was a Marine who refused to quit despite significant pain and physical limitations. I saw other Marines who were inspired by her determination to support her effort. That kind of leadership cannot be taught in any manual or training program. She looked back at Maria. Sergeant Rodriguez, the choice is yours. You can accept this assignment and help other wounded warriors find their way back to full service, or you can continue in your current role. But I want you to know that what I witnessed today was not weakness. It was strength of a kind that most people will never understand. Maria felt tears welling up in her eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude rather than frustration. Ma'am, I would be honored to accept that assignment. Word of General Hayes's decision spread quickly through the base. The same Marines who had been mocking Maria's struggles just hours earlier were now looking at her with new eyes. Lance Corporal Jenkins, who had made the cruel comment about calling an ambulance, approached her later that day. Sergeant Rodriguez, he said awkwardly, I owe you an apology. I didn't understand what you were going through. General Hayes helped me see that what you've been doing takes more courage than anything I've ever done. Over the following weeks, Maria began her new role in the Wounded Warrior Leadership Program. She worked with Marines and sailors who were recovering from everything from traumatic brain injuries to amputated limbs. Her own struggles with pain and limitation became strengths that helped her connect with people who were fighting their own battles. Master Sergeant Davis, who had been one of the first to support her during the difficult weeks after her return, became her mentor in the new program. You know, Rodriguez, he told her one day, General Hayes saw something that the rest of us missed. She saw that your injury didn't make you weak. It revealed how strong you really are. Staff Sergeant Williams also changed his attitude toward Maria. He approached her several weeks after the general's visit. "Rodriguez, I owe you an apology. I let my own prejudices cloud my judgment about your capabilities. General Hayes showed me that being a Marine isn't about being perfect. It's about never giving up." The physical therapy sessions that had once been a source of humiliation became opportunities for Maria to demonstrate proper techniques to other recovering service members. Her willingness to push through pain inspired others who were struggling with their own limitations. 6 months later, Maria received a letter from General Hayes. The general wrote that she had been following Maria's progress in the Wounded Warrior program and was impressed by the positive impact she was having on other injured service members. The letter concluded with words that Maria would treasure for the rest of her career. "Your injuries may have changed your body, but they revealed your true character. You are exactly the kind of Marine our Corps needs leading the next generation." Maria kept that letter in her desk drawer and read it whenever she was having a difficult day. It reminded her that sometimes the greatest victories come not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them with courage and determination. She had learned that being broken doesn't mean being worthless, and that sometimes our struggles become the very foundation of our strength. The young Marine, who had once been mocked for her limitations, had become a leader who inspired others to overcome their own obstacles. General Hayes had seen past the physical struggles to recognize the warrior spirit that no injury could ever destroy.